This happened back in 2015. I had planned a solo road trip to a forest a few hours away because I wanted to check out an old abandoned fire lookout I'd read about. It was something I'd been really looking forward to. I should mention, technically speaking, entering or camping in the structure was against the rules, since it hadn't been maintained in years and could be unsafe. Still, I'd read a few forum posts where people said it was standing strong, though the latest post I found was already 3 years old, so I wasn't sure what to expect when I finally reached it. Eventually, I found a small ditch off the roadside to park in. I grabbed my backpack with 2 days' worth of supplies and started hiking. There weren't any official trails leading there, so I used a handheld GPS unit to make sure I was headed the right direction, though the entire route just cut through unmarked terrain and thick forest. The hike took about 4 or 5 hours. The deeper I went, the denser and more rugged the surroundings became. I was counting on the fire tower still being intact and hopefully safe enough to crash in. If not, I figured I'd find a decent spot nearby to pitch my tent for the night. Eventually, after what felt like an exhausting trek, I spotted the lookout rising above the treetops. As I got closer, I was surprised to see that it didn't look too bad. The paint had peeled off, and it was weathered, sure, but structurally it seemed all right. I gave a few pushes to the support beams, and they felt solid, so I decided to risk it, and climbed the metal ladder which groaned under my weight but held firm. When I reached the top, I stood there stunned by the view. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions. No roads, no buildings, no signs of life. Just trees as far as I could see. After taking it in for a moment, I circled around to the entrance and stepped inside. The space was small, maybe 150 square feet, not like the big lookouts that get turned into Airbnbs. There was an old deteriorating bed frame in one corner, and a rotting wooden desk in the other. The windows were falling apart, spanning the walls, but mostly intact. There wasn't much else. I set my gear down, rolled out my sleeping pad and bag, and used my little camping stove to heat up a meal. When the sun started going down, I sat out on the ledge and watched it disappear behind the trees. Honestly, it was one of the most beautiful sunsets I've ever seen, but it seemed to fade quickly, and then night came. The sky was thick with clouds, so there wasn't any moonlight or stars, just pitch black. I sat there for a while longer, taking in the stillness. About an hour into the night, I noticed something strange below a light moving among the trees. But it wasn't a flashlight. It had a warm orange flicker like firelight. It looked like someone was walking with a torch. That struck me as odd. I mean, what were the chances of someone else being out here in such a remote location at the same time? There wasn't even a marked trail to this place, and using a torch instead of a normal flashlight. Even weirder, I watched the flickering light drift through the woods for a bit before it moved behind some trees and vanished. I waited for it to reappear, but it never did. I stayed out there for a while longer, soaking up the silence. Eventually it started getting chilly from the wind, so I stood up to take one last look before heading inside. That's when I saw someone down below. They were standing in the clearing between the forest and the base of the tower. It looked like they were staring right up at me. Maybe it was the person with the torch? "Hey," I called down, not sure what else to say. The person didn't respond, just kept staring. It went on for maybe 10 or 15 seconds. Then they raised a hand, kind of like a wave or a gesture of acknowledgement. After that, they turned and walked back into the woods without any light. It was definitely unsettling, but strangely at the time, I convinced myself it was just another hiker. Maybe someone checking if the lookout was already taken. I couldn't explain the lack of response or why they walked away in silence, but I stayed out there a little longer before heading inside to warm up in my sleeping bag. Falling asleep wasn't easy. The wind rattled the windows and the beams creaked overhead, but eventually I drifted off. I'm not sure how long I was out, but I suddenly woke up to silence. The wind had died down and it was still dark. I blinked a few times, confused, wondering what had woken me. Then I heard it, the faint sound of metal creaking. It was the ladder outside. I sat up thinking, maybe I was imagining things, but the sound came again. Metal hinges softly groaning. Someone was climbing up. I couldn't tell how far up they were, but the sound was clear. It was getting faster, like they were rushing. I unzipped my sleeping bag, grabbed my backpack, and stepped out onto the ledge, my heart pounding. As I did, the noise stopped. I stood there frozen, waiting. Then I slowly crept around the walkway toward the corner. Where the ladder came up, no one was there. I edged closer, heart racing, and leaned over to look down. The ladder was empty. Confused and terrified, I stood there for a second trying to make sense of it, when suddenly I heard rapid footsteps behind me. I turned just in time to catch a glimpse of a shadow moving past the windows on the opposite side of the tower. Without a second thought, I dropped onto the ladder and started descending as fast as I could. My hands slipped a few times on the cold rungs and my whole body was shaking. I was halfway down when I looked up and saw a head peek over the edge above. I didn't stop moving. I hit the ground and ran into the forest. Looking back, I don't even know why I grabbed my backpack when I got up, but I'm glad I did. It had my flashlight and GPS, and those saved me. I navigated back through the woods to my car. As far as I know, no one followed me. I drove off and never turned around. I had gone camping for the weekend at a small remote lake. It wasn't meant to be anything major, just a quiet getaway in the woods beside the water to relax for a few days. The first day went exactly as planned. I arrived, pitched my tent, and spent the day lounging around. The spot was pretty isolated. It had a faint footpath leading in, but nothing marked on any online maps. It was the kind of place only locals knew about. My dad used to bring me here when I was a kid. In all those years, whether with him or coming out on my own, I had never once run into another person here. There weren't even traces that anyone else had ever visited. On the second day, I spent my time walking around the lake, thinking and enjoying the calm. I probably circled it 3 or 4 times during the day. Everything stayed peaceful until one lap changed everything. That's when I noticed footprints near the edge of the tree line. It startled me. I had already passed the same spot several times and hadn't seen anything before. The prints were fresh and clear. There was no way I had missed them earlier. What made them more unnerving was that they weren't shoe prints, they were barefoot tracks. That part of the lake didn't even have easy access to the water, so it wasn't like someone had taken off their shoes for a swim, and if they had been in the water, I would have seen them. The whole thing gave me an uneasy feeling. If someone else was out here, why hadn't I seen them? Had they been hiding and watching me? I couldn't shake the discomfort. The footprints appeared to lead from the trees to the lake's edge, then back into the forest, heading deep into the woods. I had no desire to follow them, so I turned back toward my camp instead. For the rest of the day, I kept looking out toward the trees, scanning the perimeter to see if anyone appeared, but no one ever did. As the sun started to dip, my anxiety returned. The footprints still felt wrong to me, and knowing someone had been there, maybe still, was left me unsettled. When it got dark, I built up the campfire with a solid stack of wood and tried to relax. I did everything I could to distract myself, but it wasn't easy. Part of me thought I was overthinking things. Another part said my discomfort was completely reasonable. Then sometime after nightfall, I heard footsteps coming from the woods. I whipped my head toward the trees. The sound was clear, more than one person walking slowly in my direction. I stayed still watching until finally 2 figures stepped into the glow of the firelight. A man and a woman stood there side by side, just outside the fire's reach. I couldn't make out their faces, only their silhouettes. I couldn't even tell how old they were. "Can I help you?" I asked. The moment the words left my mouth, the woman turned and bolted into the forest. She vanished into the dark. The man, however, didn't move. He didn't speak, didn't look after her, just stood there still as ever. That's when I noticed something chilling. He wasn't wearing shoes. These had to be the same people who left the footprints earlier. I asked again if he needed anything. He didn't reply. After a few seconds, he turned and walked quietly back into the trees, just as wordlessly as he'd arrived. Internally, I was spiraling. That had been one of the strangest, most uncomfortable moments I had ever experienced. It didn't even feel real. I made up my mind then and there. I wasn't staying another minute in those woods. I started packing up immediately. I don't mess around when things feel off. Luckily, my setup was simple, and within minutes, everything was packed down and stashed in my bag. I didn't know where those people had gone, and I didn't want to be around to find out. I kicked the unlit logs from the fire so it would die down quickly, then set off into the woods. The hike back was nearly 2 hours. For the first 10 minutes, I was tense, constantly checking over my shoulder, listening for anything unusual. But the farther I got, the more at ease I began to feel. Then about 40 minutes in the forest became dead quiet. Not even insects made a sound. That's when I heard running, footsteps fast, deliberate, off in the distance, maybe 100 feet away. Definitely human. I couldn't see anything, so I kept walking, trying to stay calm. A few minutes later, it happened again, this time on the opposite side of me. The steps sounded softer than they should have, which made me think whoever it was barefoot. It had to be the same two I saw earlier. If they had followed me this far, what were they trying to do? The footsteps kept coming, brief bursts of running. Then silence. It felt like they were tracking me, moving quickly from one side to the other, always staying just out of view. I've never felt fear like I did during that hike out. Somehow, though, I made it to my truck. I jumped in, started the engine, and got the hell out of there. I never figured out who those people were or what they were doing out there. I don't know if they were dangerous, lost, or something else entirely. South. I'm a 24-year-old woman from northern Arizona, and this happened a few years ago. Back then I was living full-time in a small camper van, traveling along the West Coast. There are all kinds of ways people choose to live on the road in vans or RVs, but I preferred staying away from big cities and camping near small towns between destinations. Most of the time, though, I'd park deep in the backcountry. Being alone in the woods felt more comfortable to me than trying to stealth camp in some crowded parking lot. Honestly, it just felt safer. Cities could be sketchy at night, but when you're out in the forest with no one around, you only have to worry about wildlife and the occasional strange noise. It was quieter, and I liked it that way. At the time, I was slowly working my way between two major cities in Washington. I was taking back roads, staying at little campsites for a few days each. On this particular day, I turned off the road onto a narrow dirt path that wound its way deep into the trees. There were a few small clearings along the way, but they were all empty and looked like they hadn't been used in a while. I kept going until I found a larger pull-off at the end of the trail. It wasn't anything scenic, just dense woods in all directions, but it was private and quiet. The space was big enough to turn around in, and someone had even made a fire pit out of stones in the middle. I parked, leveled the van, and set up for the evening. Since it was spring, it rained nearly every day in Washington. There wasn't much to do outside, so I opened the sliding door for some fresh air and started making dinner on my propane stove. It was around sunset, still early, so I had a while before bedtime. Over the next half hour, the sun dipped below the horizon and the rain started falling harder. I slid the van door closed to keep water out, leaving a small window cracked near the back for ventilation. I laid on my bed, pulled out my laptop, and started watching a show. Halfway through the episode, I noticed a glare on the screen, a reflection of light coming through the small window behind me. Before I could react, the light disappeared. Not by moving, but by shutting off like someone flicked a switch. I turned around and looked outside, but saw nothing. It was pitch black and pouring. I had no idea how far the light had been or what caused it. Since I was on a trail with other clearings, I figured maybe someone else had pulled in, and their headlights had bounced through the trees. Maybe they'd turned off their car quickly. The only thing that didn't sit right was the angle. The light hadn't come from the road I entered on. Just thick trees were behind that window. Maybe there was another path I hadn't seen. There wasn't much I could do, so I turned back to my laptop. Every now and then, I'd glance out the window or think I heard something, but with the rain pounding the roof, it was hard to tell what was real. I never saw anything definite, so I tried not to stress. Around 10 or 11 p.m., I decided to turn in for the night. I shut everything down, closed the windows, pulled the covers across the glass, and laid down. It was nearly pitch black inside. Usually I had no trouble sleeping, but that night I just couldn't settle. The rain intensified, and eventually thunder joined in. It got so loud that sleep wasn't even an option. About 2 hours in over the storm, I swore I heard something outside. Something real. It sounded like someone or something running and snapping a branch close to the van. It was clear enough to make me sit up, but there was no follow-up noise, just silence. I peered through the window, but couldn't even see the ground. It was too dark. Still, I had the distinct feeling someone was out there watching. I closed the cover again, sat there and tried to tell myself it was nothing. A minute later, I heard a voice. A man's voice, quiet, like a harsh whisper, like he was speaking to someone else. I didn't dare look. If I pulled the cover back, they'd definitely see me, assuming they hadn't already figured out someone was inside. That thought alone made it worse. If they knew someone was in here, what did they want? After a couple minutes of silence, except for the thunder and rain, I heard something right outside the sliding door. It sounded like plastic flexing, like someone leaning their weight against it. Then came a knock. A few seconds later, another. I was frozen. They had to know I was in here, but I still didn't respond. Maybe they didn't know if I was alone, or if I was a man or a woman. That gave me a sliver of safety, at least enough to stay silent. They kept knocking slow and spaced out. 5 minutes passed. Still nothing said, just knock after knock in the pouring rain. Then finally a voice. "Sheriff's Department, open up." Yeah, right. I didn't believe that for a second. If it were true, why? Hadn't they identified themselves from the beginning? He kept knocking and calling out things like, "We need to talk to you," "Open the door," and "This is law enforcement." It all sounded forced, like he was trying to keep it calm and avoid escalating. I lifted the window cover just a little slowly. All I could make out was a dark figure near the door. From the outline, I didn't see any badge, no uniform, nothing that looked official. That was when I knew this wasn't right. I sat there, heart pounding, running through my options. After half a minute of knocking, growing more impatient, I made up my mind I was going to risk it and drive out. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. Immediately I heard running 2 people sprinting toward the van from the side. One of them came into view right beside me as I started pulling out. Thankfully the van didn't get stuck. I made it back onto the trail and kept going. As I drove, I didn't see a single other vehicle. No one else had been out there, which made everything about what just happened all the more disturbing. Later I contacted the local county office to report what had happened. Unsurprisingly, they confirmed that no officers had been out in that area that night. And of course, I never heard anything back, whatever those people were planning. I'm lucky I got out of there. I haven't had any similar experiences since, but I'm a lot more cautious now.